So today we're going to do another installment on fly fishing in the surf. Today we're going to talk about fishing with two-handed rods, or often referred to as spey rods. We don't really spey cast them, we strictly overhead cast them, but there's a lot of advantages to a rod like this, particularly in a situation like the surf. Some of the advantages are distance. The rods typically are anywhere from 12 to 15 feet. And you can achieve quite a bit more distance with those rods, which from the surf, from the beach, can be a pretty important factor. Average person can probably pick up pretty quickly about 30 feet or so in distance, which can make all the difference in catching fish or not catching fish. One of the parts of it that's probably less understood by most people is how much easier, how much less effort there is in using them. Because you have both hands on the rod, you're in a much stronger position. It takes a lot less effort because you've got two different hands doing the work, so spreading the load out, so to speak. So it's a much easier thing to cast, repetitively with. You're going to be able to make more casts, thus catch more fish. It's also easier to lift a sinking tip line out of the water, a sinking line out of the water, or a big heavy fly because of that longer rod, that longer lever. It's much easier to get that up out of the water and get that thing back out. If you're fishing an intermediate line or even a faster sinking line in some instances, much easier to pick it up out of the water. Overhead casting with these is a fairly simple thing. Both hands on the rod, you're going to use a fairly short motion with your hands, with your body. So it's a lot less strenuous, stressful on your joints as well. So for someone that has issues with, say, their shoulder or elbow or something like that, there's a lot more compact movements, a lot less stress and strain on those joints. So it's a lot easier to do repetitive casting with it from that standpoint as well. Basically, in casting, your dominant hand, in my case my left hand, the average person on the right, would be on the top. Your hands are going to be roughly shoulder width apart. Your non-dominant hand on the bottom, dominant hand on top. Basically, the top hand guides the stroke. You're pushing the rod back and forth on a relatively straight path back and forth, and the bottom hand actually supplies a lot of the power. You're going to, as you make your back cast coming back, you're going to push your bottom hand away from your body, and as you come forward, you're going to pull your bottom hand into your body, in towards your sternum. So the motion is actually in some ways similar to casting a spinning rod, particularly a bigger, say, surf rod or something like that with a longer handle. You're coming back and you're pulling with the bottom hand into you to generate that speed. Again, it's necessary to smoothly accelerate, make the stop just as you would with a normal rod, but with this, you're doing obviously that longer lever, that longer rod, that rod tip is moving through a longer path, so it's generating more speed, thus making the line go further. So without a whole lot of extra extraneous movement on your part, that rod tip moves a long way, generating a lot more speed, making the line go further. So it's much simpler to cast all day, with this. Couple of things about the rods equipment wise. You need a relatively fast action rod. You don't want a real slow action rod, something that might be labeled as a rod for Skagit or something like that. Those tend to be very slow action. You want something that's more of a fast action, where most of the action, the bend, is in the very tip of the rod. Something that may be recommended for, say, Scandinavian style casting. This happens to be a Sage Igniter here, one of the better ones. There are Loomis makes rods such as their NRX and their Asquith that will do. And for someone just looking to get into it without spending a ton of money, you can get into it with something like this Redington Chromer. This is a 12.5 foot for an 8 that makes a pretty good basic size rod for most fishing, for snook or Spanish mackerel and all those species, that sells for just under $400. So it's a really great rod for not terribly expensive, and it's a perfect setup for fishing the beach. And if you ever had any questions on any of this, you can obviously give us a call and we can kind of go over it with you. But if you haven't tried this and you do like to surf fish a lot, it's really well worth your time.